Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about acrylic painting. We're going to start with some basics. So I'm working on a panel here. You can work on canvas or paper with acrylic. It's pretty versatile that way. But the first thing that I want to do is prime my surface. So I've got some white gesso here, and gesso is basically just like an acrylic primer. It just prepares our canvas. So I got my brush just a little bit wet to slightly thin down the gesso. Getting my brush wet while I'm doing this helps get rid of some of those ridges as well. You can also sand your gesso down to smooth things as well if you are very particular about your surface. I am taking my time to make sure that I don't see really any brush strokes. Okay, so our first layer of gesso has dried. I'm ready to move on to my second layer, but I'm actually going to add a little twist to this. For my painting, I would like to work on a toned background. So I want to actually paint this gray. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a little bit of black acrylic paint, and I think I might tint it just a little bit with some magenta. I was going to mix up kind of a red violet to work with for my image. I'm going to be working monochromatically. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this gesso with my palette knife, and I'm just going to plop it down on my palette, and from here I'm just going to scoop up my paints and mix them together. I'm just aiming for a slightly toned gray, so it'll have a little bit of red violet in it. So for the most part, it's going to be gray. And don't do what I did and put your drinking water next to your paint water. That is a recipe for disaster. I have drank my paint water way too many times, or at least been very close. I don't think I've actually drank it. It's touched my lips. It's close enough. And you know, it's actually really interesting because I'm probably going to be painting over all of this and you won't see it at all anyway. So you may ask yourself, well, why are you doing this? The answer is simple. The white of the canvas as it is right now is really overwhelming. It's so bright, and oftentimes we have a hard time seeing values properly when it is up against such a bright value. It makes kind of like mid-range values seem really dark, so it makes us kind of afraid to go to the extremes of things. All right, so my layer of toned gesso is dry, so now it's time to put our image on top. I'm going to be painting my fabulous custom roller skates that I put together, and we need to transfer this image onto the canvas. What I'm going to do for the sake of time is to do a quick carbon transfer. So what I've done is I have colored over the back of my paper, and I am going to line up my paper where I want it to lie, and then I'm going to tape it onto the canvas like so. And from here I'm going to take a ballpoint pen and I'm just going to trace around the primary form of the roller skates. And I'm going to have a very light drawing here, so it might be a little hard to see. I used my leftover gray from when I was toning the canvas to paint over part of my palette. All right, I'm going to take a little bit of white. So just a quick reminder, monochromatic means one color. So mono is one, chroma, color. Basically, what that means is you have one color plus tints and shades of that hue or color. So tints, we're adding white to make it lighter, shades, we're adding black to make it darker. So what I think I'm going to work with is kind of a red-violet mixture as my hue. If I were to turn that red-violet into black and white, what would happen is it would be a relatively dark value already. So my painting itself is primarily going to be tints. And the tints are going to be all those kind of lighter values, and then the shades are going to be the darker values. As I am working with my paint, one thing that's really important, when you're grabbing paint with your brush, don't just dunk your brush right into the middle of the paint. You want to take it off the end and kind of pull it out onto your palette. That is going to load up your brush in a way that you won't have like big clumps of paint on it, which is going to be really beneficial to you as you begin working. So to start this tutorial, I guess now that I'm actually painting, I am going to actually just make a value scale down at the bottom. So I want to start with my hue or my pure color. From here, I'm going to slowly add white into the mix, taking care to occasionally grab some water. So when I grab water, I'm not dunking my entire brush. I am just slowly dipping very, very gently, like barely any water, onto my brush. If I want to keep my palette wet and I'm working for a while, I can always use a spray bottle and just kind of spray the paint on the palette from time to time. I also have this drying medium, which kind of slows down the time it takes for the paint to dry. So that can be, a helpful tool in extending your work time and extending the life of your paint. I know a lot of people hate making value scales, but I think it's good practice in checking to see what happens when you add certain amounts of paint. I know I hated it with a passion, but I really value them now. All right, now we'll get in there. Not quite fully white, but close enough. Okay, so I'm going to wash my brush out thoroughly. We're going to want to make sure we kind of scrub it along the bottom of the can. One way to check to see if your brush is in fact clean enough to work is when you wipe it off on your paper towel. Do you see a lot of paint coming off? Because if you do, you probably need to clean it more. All right, so now I'm going to start making some shades. So again, we start with that damp brush, pull some of the acrylic out, and then with black is such a strong pigment that I barely want to add any in there to make my shades. All right, and then it looks like our last spot will be pretty much black. All right, so we have a nice value scale. We practiced our colors. Now it's time to get into the good stuff.